think lots of stuff changed post Rio. We got a far better understanding of the impact of culture, of the importance of mental health and well-being in terms of mental health, and keeping your athletes in a good place actually means they're more available for training, they're more available for competition. And some of the research that our mental health team are doing now is seeing an incredible relationship between mental health and injury. And when mental health is poor, you're more likely to be injured.
Well, welcome, folks. Welcome to another episode of the Supporting Champions podcast. Joining me today is Joe Harrison. Now, Joe heads up the Performance Lifestyle Services at the UK Sports Institute. So Joe's work is pivotal in supporting athletes across their careers, focusing on areas such as well-being and life beyond sport. Joe, thank you so much for joining me. How are you?
Thanks for having me, Steve. I'm really well, thank you. Summer's arrived.
Summer's arrived, yeah. Now, how is your well-being and life beyond sport? Do you practice what you coach?
I absolutely try to. I've learned over the years to protect space and to protect yourself, particularly in a role that is all about kind of giving of yourself and your time to others. So 100%, the focus that we've had on mental health and well-being probably since post Rio has definitely impacted us all, I would say, as practitioners and as individuals. For sure, we've learned some stuff too.
Right, okay, that's interesting. Or just hearing you say that reminds me of the conversation with Andrew Rogers from Change Minds, in the sense that if you're supporting others, you've got to sort your own house out a lot of the time.
Yeah. And I think the approach that we take as the senior technical leads in the team and the role that we play for practitioners is very much trying to almost deliver performance lifestyle to the practitioners, and just being very conscious of that, and definitely being in that space of practicing what we preach and not expecting athletes to do something that we don't.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, like the doctor that smokes and you think, I'm not sure I'm going to take your advice. You've got to... Yeah, okay. So, okay, right. I'm conscious that we worked together for a few years, Joe, and I'll be asking you a few questions that I damn well should know the answer to. Suffice to say that it would be good to capture those for the audience. But it's nearly 8 years since I moved on from the EIS, now UKSI, and so I'm not fully up to date, and it'd be great to hear how things have progressed. But before we perhaps get into the ins and outs of performance lifestyle support and where it sits and what it does and how you balance what you do, could you just share with us, with me, with the audience, just how did it start for you? Because I think that journey in itself is really interesting. From perhaps the service wasn't even there when you sort of started in the system, and it's just grown. Could you just give me sort of a bit of a potted sort of journey for yourself as well?
Yeah, sure. Gosh, I think it's next week. I've been working for the Institute. I did the EIS or the UKSI for 22 years.
Are you trying to outlive everybody on it?
Just staggering.
22 years. Gosh, yeah, put something in perspective.
I didn't have a master's when I joined the Institute, and I still don't. Still a little gremlin. I think I thought, as a sports science graduate, I'd come into the Institute and, perhaps they'd sponsor me to do my physiology masters, and I could work in the lab. So I joined very much in an administrative role, and just, I guess kind of being around athletes and coaches for the first, for the first time properly. Very quickly realised the lab is probably not the place for me. And I guess that early experience of being in that admin role and just being the one who got to chat to the athletes and the coaches as they came through, and just found them pretty fascinating in terms of ordinary people, but trying to do something extraordinary, and the ups and downs of that, and the challenges and the sacrifices, and just became pretty fascinated with that. And at the time, the UK provided ACE, which was Athlete Career and Education, and bought a license to deliver that from the Australian Institute. And there were about half a dozen ACE advisors across the country who would essentially meet athletes in motorway services or
Hmm.
or coffee shops. So very separate from the actual environment, and and certainly not integrated. But we had an ACE advisor in Manchester, and and I became fascinated in her role, and she was very nice and allowed me to kind of shadow and just kind of absorb myself in as much of her world as I could. When she moved on, I was able to kind of act up and into that role, and that's where it really started. And then around that point within the UK system, that we were sort of looking to move away from obviously delivering an Australian program and trying to develop something that spoke more to the needs and the wants of our athletes and coaches and sports. That there was a significant review at that point, and performance directors contributed to that and said, look, we recognise the need for something to support athletes in this space, but we also want it to have and to contribute to performance. So I think the feeling was that the ACE program really only asked the athletes to look to the future. It didn't really ask them about how they are kind of living um, and keeping themselves in a good place to perform right now. So ultimately, that's where the performance bit of what we do really came from.
Yeah, okay. And so there was a transition for you of thinking, where could I fit into this here a
Yeah,
little bit,
yeah.
but becoming fascinated by,
Mhm.
was it Rachel
Rachel
Davies?
Ramsey,
Rachel
Rachel,
Ramsey,
yeah,
Rachel
yeah,
Davies. Yeah, okay. Now, so we worked together at the BOMC. So there's
yeah,
a physiology master's connection somewhere there
yeah.
that didn't happen. But um, okay, so and maybe we can do some of the what's happened more recently. But those early days of sort of performance lifestyle, how did it start to integrate? I think because I think that athlete career education, it did feel like it was going off to the library. It
Mhm.
did feel like athletes were. I'm doing my PhD or my master's or my law degree separately, and then how did it start to become integrated?
So I think around sort of maybe just pre-Beijing, because I think that coincided with me going on my first lot of maternity leave. And there was another significant review at that point that involved sort of Loughborough academics, and and a full report and a full set of recommendations that was submitted to UK Sport, and that's really where the core funding for performance lifestyle really started to kick in, and essentially the recommendation was, we need and want to do this, but if you're going to do it, you need to do it properly, and and PL needs to be a discipline with practitioners as opposed to an add-on to an athlete and sports services role, which is what it was before as athlete support managers. So at that point, where you could be full time as a PL practitioner, which for me, if that change hadn't have happened, I probably would have gone and done something else, because that's the bit of my job that I absolutely adored. But it was only a bit, and it kind of wasn't enough. So really sort of, really lucky for me that change happened, and we became full time, and then we started to assign to sport, because previous to that, I was the kind of phone number that was given out to every funded athlete from Stoke to Carlisle in the Northwest. So in
Mhm.
across every sport, you were only ever a kind of firefighting, reactive, just trying to solve problems at the end of the phone, jumping in the car when you could to see athletes that needed some support. So it was extremely reactive, and therefore probably not that impactful, particularly in the long term. So once we started to be assigned to sports and you had set amount of time with the sport, you could be in the environment, you got a better understanding of what the athletes were experiencing. You could speak to the coach, you could influence people around the athlete, and all of a sudden that space starts to open up. You get a better understanding, more visibility with the athlete, and just a bit more of a constant presence in the performance environment.
I probably should ask a question about how it was received and the variety of different perspectives and philosophies and acceptance. But I wonder if I can come back to that. So, because we've sort of jumped into it a little bit, but for clarity, what is performance lifestyle at its core? And what other names does it currently go by? What other names might other people
Mm-hmm.
recognize it in other sports? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's called performance lifestyle, but it doesn't. That's quite ethereal in some ways, isn't it?
Mm.
And it can be misleading if not if understanding what the role actually entails.
Yeah, so I describe it as holistic care, support, and development of athletes as they move onto, through, and beyond world-class programs. So for us, that's really about the care, support, and development of athletes as individuals whilst they're on this athletic and high performance journey. So that's for me, one of the phrases that has always kind of struck me is performance is a human endeavor, and we can't negate the care and support and development of the human within that and focus purely on the performance. So I guess our focus is more on the person, and I think we impact and contribute to performance in an indirect way. That's not necessarily why we're here. Of course, we want athletes to win and to be successful multiple times, but we're also equally motivated and passionate about seeing an athlete learn and develop outside of sport, seeing them develop as people, gain qualifications, land an amazing job. So it's really about that development of that whole person and that performer in order to deliver the performance, right now in terms of what they're choosing to do, but also in the future. And there's a delivery framework and different sort of areas and pillars that sit beneath that. But ultimately, that's what it is. And the essence of PL, I think, I still believe from my own practitioner days, is the ability to create a safe and non-judgmental space within a performance environment where, life throws its curveballs and hand grenades at all of us, and athletes are not exempt from that. And and quite often needing a space to be able to be open and transparent about what is happening and the support that they need is critical, and that's not always possible for all athletes within their performance staff. So being able to create that safe space and to create the kind of relationship where you get the very timid, tentative knock at the door, and an athlete will come in and sit down and say what is hard and say what is difficult and say what is challenging, and that might be, kind of something happening for them in their lives outside sport. It could be a very complex relationship within sport, but needing a space where they can talk and they can work through issues like that, I think is critical to that journey.
Mm. So there's so there's a Venn diagram here, isn't there? Really, in terms of things that you could support the athlete
Mm-hmm.
with, that once they've got some solutions, they've perhaps used their own resourcefulness to unpick a problem, framework, or you've provided a scaffold for that to happen, that can map onto improved training, greater energy, lower stress, a better physiological stress-based hormone milieu for the body to sit in, as well as another side, which is actually I've got a few demons or I've got a few problems that are related to the sport and I'm not happy,
Yeah.
or that there are issues that potentially would pull against the performance side. Would that be
Yeah.
a fair summary?
Yeah, definitely. I think, recently, or certainly within this cycle, one of the heads of performance support in one of the sports described it to me as, as PL is a central strategy. So we already kind of know what it is. Like it's definitive, but it gets applied and contextualized from a strategical, proactive perspective into each sport. But yeah, but there is still that reactive piece that through a relationship and with coaching and mentoring skills and experienced practitioners can offer that space for athletes. And that's not saying, we would work to solve everything that an athlete brings. We're pretty clear on our boundaries, and when we refer, we work really closely with sports psychologists, we work really closely with our mental health team, and safeguarding leads, etc. But it's just that generally, because we can provide that space that stands just to the side of performance. And athletes have told us they like us and they want us and they need us in that space. And for us, because we're co-funded as well, the ability to say to an athlete, your performance director doesn't necessarily pay my wages, is pretty powerful in terms of the space that we want to create and we want to protect. So 100%, the vast majority of safeguarding disclosures and reports within our organisation come through the PL team because because we hold that space.
Yeah. And how do you as a team or as a practitioner, and I'm conscious that this question could come across as clumsy because I think we're all growing and evolving,
Yeah.
and an understanding of how athletes are supported to success. How are you balancing the need for the program to challenge the athlete? If someone comes back to you and says, "Oh, it's just too hard," where does the line sit for you, or how do you explore that conversation when actually you need that person to dig in to
Mm.
they need to
Mm.
understand what the level is. I'm conscious of the conversation I had with Joe Baker on the podcast about talent, and that it's beholden upon us to be able to, in support of athletes, to say this is the next level. How do you have that conversation?
Yeah, I think for sure it's a huge grey area, isn't it? That
Yeah.
and every conversation and every scenario is so individual and so different, and there's a number of things that are important and at play. One is practitioners being supported by technical leads and being able to come away from a conversation like that with an athlete and debrief and reflect and effectively receive some supervision. And another one is about the importance of relationships around the athlete. So it's equally as important for a PL practitioner to have a good relationship with the coach, to be able to have an adult to adult conversation about what I'm hearing, and and how do we work through this, obviously with the athlete's permission. And I think it is an exploratory conversation with the athlete. It is elite and it is hard, but there's also a responsibility for the system not to do harm, and and to try and establish kind of where that line is, and to remind the athlete that they have choice. I think that's really, really powerful. However difficult it like you've got a choice, you've got choices, you've got options, and our job through applying coaching skill is to unearth what those options are, and to support you to make a decision, whether to take some action, whether to dig in. So very sort of exploratory, very conversational, but with the ability to come out of that as a practitioner to check something that doesn't quite feel right. And I always, I'm a huge believer in gut instinct. If something doesn't feel right that you're hearing, you must check it out. You have to have a conversation with, with a technical lead or with a more, with myself, um, to establish, where we think this is. Is there some risk here? Is there inappropriate practice or behaviour, or or whatever that might be, or is it the harsh reality of, of the extraordinary thing that you are trying to achieve,
Yeah.
and the reality of what that takes.
Does that require an induction almost? Do you as staff members, or do you inform that induction process? I'm thinking perhaps the levels that you talked about, sort of the move onto a world class program, that transition point, but also the various different steps of taking their first international vest or the first major competition. Is that a conversation you try and proactively create?
Not, I don't think specifically within a sort of PL world. I would say, PL practitioners have a massive role to play in that transition in, and
Yeah.
we effectively try to kind of design that transition experience and process with the sport. And so we have like a PL bit of that in terms of inducting athletes into PL, but in terms of inducting athletes and caretaking that transition into that world, in the ideal world, we are co-designing and delivering that, like, with a sport. And I think one of our principles and things that we would lead with and try to influence the sport in is being honest about expectations and about what athletes can and will struggle with on this journey. I remember myself as a practitioner, like, and I spent my time at British Cycling, a good chunk of my time, and within the first 6 weeks of new academy riders joining, they're bouncing around the velodrome, they can't quite believe they're here, soaking it all up, absolutely loving it. And there is a point at about 6 weeks where you see them walking around the curved corridors of the velodrome and they are shattered. They've
The
hit a bit of a
training
wall.
volumes,
The
training
honeymoon has
reality.
worn off. Yeah, they're fed up with
Yeah,
having to
okay.
do their own washing and cooking. So yeah, so there's definitely a reality piece in that. But I do think it's really powerful to remind athletes about their choice, because it can feel, particularly if you've come through a pathway that you're just on this conveyor belt and you're going from sort of one stage of that to the next without necessarily connecting and remembering why you're here, and why are you choosing to be here? What is it for you that makes this what you want to do?
Mm. It strikes me that the information that you are able to act on, whether that could be maybe the body language signals, as well as the quality of conversations that you're um, able to conjure
Mm.
with athletes, it strikes me that that actually requires a very specific skill set for performance lifestyle practitioners. What are the qualities that you look for in those staff members?
Yeah, there's a reason why coaching and mentoring is our kind of golden thread, if you like. Because there is no, undergrad in performance lifestyle. There's no kind of direct academic route. We've got a wonderfully diverse team that I think is a huge strength to us and to the institute. So we've got different professional backgrounds. We've got ex-athletes, we've got, people that have crossed over from other sports science disciplines. We've got people with psychology backgrounds that haven't necessarily gone down the sort of chartered sports psych route. We've got occupational therapists who, do an incredible job with Paralympic sport and para athletes. But the thing that sort of binds us all together is a level 7 qualification in executive coaching and leadership mentoring. And that is the how. The what is transitions, career development, financial health, mental health and well-being. But the how is absolutely that skill set. And And critically, what we look for, particularly in recruitment, is, you might not necessarily come to us with that, with the qualification, but we will absolutely put you in front of an athlete in an interview and see the quality of your conversation, how you build rapport, how you keep yourself out of that conversation, how you help somebody explore through conversation, and also um, the correlation between a high amount of self-awareness in our staff and their ability to coach well. What we've learned over the years is somebody who understands themselves and can reflect and can build on their sort of self-awareness. That's the absolute foundation stone for really good practice, and really good reflective practice. So yeah, it's critical that and it's not mandatory, right? Athletes don't have to engage with us. There is nothing compulsory about PL, so it's so critical that that engagement is enjoyable and is impactful. So yeah, with we started to do our training and coaching mentoring around 2010, and it completely revolutionized our ability to practice and for it to be developmental in nature for the athlete. I think prior
Right.
to that, we had all the responsibility and felt like we had to fix everything and have the answers to everything, and and through the qualifications and the standards that we've set, we understand that that's not our job. Our job is to ask the right questions, to facilitate fresh thinking, to develop an athlete's capacity to work through their own issues and solve their own challenges. Our job's just to ask some good questions.
And do you have I mean, you talked about sort of the phases that you typically support people through, but are there some sort of standout examples or experiences that athletes have where they think, I've got to go and see the performance lifestyle
Yeah,
advisor
yeah,
here?
yeah.
But even illustrated by people who, I'm not that bothered, I'm not really interested, but actually now I am.
Yeah.
Are there a few crunch points that you can think of that stand out?
Yeah, definitely. I think, at the start of the journey, a lot of athletes, when they come onto a program, will have to relocate. So they will have to move to, particularly if their sport is a centralized program, and that requires an enormous amount of change in every kind of, in every kind of way, from leaving your friends and family behind to receiving funding for the first time, and so it's a bit more than spends now. You've actually got some proper stuff that you have to do with that money and learning to manage that, living independently, but not just living independently as a student, living independently as an athlete, and the high standards that are set. There is no real give in the expectations, I don't think, for an athlete, in a centralized program. Whether you're podium funded or podium potential funded, you need to kind of you need to be and give your best, and so you need your life and your stuff together in the background in order for you to do that. So I think there's a lot around living skills, like the skill of living and organizing and managing your life. Injury is another, is another inevitable part of elite sport, and typically what we experience is the sharp sort of um, dump of perspective that an injury will give an athlete, in terms of, okay, I'm not invincible,
Okay.
and this could stop before I'm ready for it to. And what we see is typically an engagement, or certainly an opportunity, when an athlete is injured, to have that kind of conversation about the future, about plan Bs, about how you can protect yourself and your future by doing some development, and by figuring that kind of next bit out, and also using that time constructively, rather than
Yeah, okay.
you
An
know,
outlet.
yeah, like rather than just sort of ruminating on, all the stuff you're missing out on, let's use the time constructively and do some good stuff. And of course, probably the biggest area, and an area that we've made some massive developments in, is supporting athletes at the end of that journey, and coming to the point where, whether they're choosing it or not, not necessarily their athletic careers, but certainly their time on funding is coming to an end. And again, sort of post Tokyo, we've been able to kind of develop our team, and we've got dedicated roles in what we call our
Right.
futures coaches, who are independent of any sport. They are a central resource that allows us to support athletes for up to 2 years, when previously your in-sport PL practitioner can only really extend that to 6 months, because we've got a whole load of athletes coming in as other athletes are kind of going out. So now we've got some central resource that enables us to, if required, to support athletes for much longer, which is something that's taken sort of a long time to do, but we're glad we've got it now.
Yeah, and come back to that sort of acceptance question about how do you take performance directors with you on this? And I certainly remember, I mean, this is going back now, but I remember real tensions between performance directors, coaches, and athletes. Of saying, and athletes that maybe sits close to a medal but not that close, that wants to create a future and wants to study, and that means time on task studying. And the athlete, the performance director, and the coaches had this tension of, I don't want them distracted. I want them focused, and I want them just doing nothing other than resting. Lucy Gossage talked about this on the podcast.
Yeah.
When she went to go full time, her job in the afternoon was kind of to watch Netflix, and she hated it.
Yeah.
So she had that energy to do things. How do you broach that conversation with athletes and coaches?
Yeah, it takes time. I liken it to turning a tanker, and I think
Every
one.
single time.
Yeah, every
There's
day,
100 tankers to line up here.
yeah, every day. But it is turning, and there is movement, and that's certainly
Okay.
what kind of keeps me in the game. I think it's not just one thing, right? It's culturally, as it's culturally, it's individually, like as a system, we're learning and better understanding. I think lots of stuff changed post Rio. We got a far better understanding of the impact of culture, of the importance of mental health and well-being, and how stagnant and stale some athletes can be, when there is only training and competing in their lives. And you've got to think about it, like, and relate it to yourself, or to your children. You think, like, would I want what is happening with that athlete for my kids or for me? If I had nothing in my life other than work, like, that's not a healthy place to be. And so I think as a system, as a workforce, we are learning and understanding that far better. The the really, really kind of hardline performance narrative isn't is there. Like, it's not like, anybody wants to win any less. I think we just understand that this stuff isn't it's only going to add. We're almost flipping it. There is a real fear around, this stuff is going to take something away. And I think we've started to learn to see it as an addition rather than a subtraction. And the buffer almost that this kind of activity can provide in terms of mental health, and keeping your athletes in a good place actually means they're more available for training, they're more available for competition. And some of the research that our mental health team are doing now is seeing, like, an incredible relationship between mental health and injury. And when mental health is poor, you're more likely to be injured. So I think it's a number of things. I think it's culturally, it's hearing the experience of athletes, particularly sort of post Rio, that was incredibly powerful. It's better research, it's better understanding, and yeah, and that tanker is is definitely still moving, but it's moved considerably from when I was a practitioner.
I think that's really interesting about that idea of stagnant and stale. And I've talked to so many people over the years about the importance of variety into a training program. And coaches think, okay, what we need to do is we need that training program, we need that session. That's the one I did as an athlete, and it means that they're simplifying their training program to the extent that it's boring, and monotony being the cause of burnout, and how important it is to have variety in there. But here it sounds as though there is a case actually to look after the person so that they are happy, they are engaged, they have some energy. There will be times it's going to be tough. And so how much of your work is about trying to create well-being for the athlete?
Yeah, a huge amount. And as you were talking then, it made me think of a really striking example of exactly this, with a visually impaired athlete who because of their impairment, lack the stimulation that you and I get, just through sight. So the monotony of doing the same thing every day, mixed with their impairment, meant a real, a real negative impact on them. In terms of performance, but personally as well. And the PL practitioner, working with this athlete to figure out, like what was happening, and what might help, and they got them into. I think they ended up developing a podcast, which was a vlog. I've not got my terminology right, but essentially she was showing that she could cook, even though she was visually impaired, and sort of videoing recipes, and putting them out online, and it just completely changed who she was, what she looked like, how she walked down the corridor. It was pretty incredible. So yeah, 100%. I think we've become much more purposeful in wellbeing practice. We've become to understand it a lot more. I think we knew even pre-Rio that well-being and understanding that space was massive for our practice, because we could see the impact of it not being there, or not being in a good place for the athletes. So we part funded a PhD that started in 2005, and it was all about trying to define what we mean by well-being, particularly in our elite athlete population, and to create a model, and to understand, like, the component parts of that, but then to also create a measure where we could measure for well-being both inside and outside of sport, make an intervention, and measure again. And the measure's useful, but ultimately what it enables us to do is pinpoint and have a more specific and better conversation around well-being. So it's not just kind of like, how happy are you today? How are you doing on a scale of 1 to 10? We've got these 14 component parts that make up elite athlete well-being. And if we take a measure, it's not diagnostic or anything like that, but it enables us to say, this area, it might be autonomy, or it might be vitality, or any of these sort of components that just enable us to have and pinpoint and get to a better conversation a lot quicker. And I think that, coming back to that whole kind of practicing what we preach piece, we are purposefully intentional about our own self-care. It's on the agenda between every technical lead and every practitioner, because it's always on the agenda for practitioners and athletes, helping athletes to understand what it is that keeps you in a good place, whether that is, regular contact with the non-judgmental love of your family, while you're living and training away, or creating new friendships and connections in a different place, or whether it's learning something. What keeps you in a good place, and how do we help athletes to be intentional around that, and not to just expect it to happen.
Yeah. Interesting. I'm remembering a conversation with Meka Bartels on the podcast about, and her definition, and was quite insistent that actually hedonism or hedonic well-being was massively overlapping with eudaimonic. And it wasn't necessarily a case of, oh, well, doing stuff that makes you happy is just an aside. It maps against it, and it correlates and it underpins you achieving. And it's got me thinking about, where you are at in terms of the evidence base that you're creating. That whilst there might be a Venn diagram you'll be looking at and addressing things that aren't necessarily to do with performance, but they're supporting the person. But equally, there is a Venn diagram that says that if we're looking after the person, they're going to be happier, and they're going to be, as Maker would say, feeling well and functioning well. That does associate with improved performance. Is that something you're starting to be able to pinpoint, create an evidence base for the work that you do?
I think so, yeah, and that definitely came out of the PhD. It's about feeling well but functioning well. So those two things sort of need to be in place, and I think this also kind of links to the more to me piece that we talk about. That's almost become like a central philosophy now within the PL team. This is about athletes being more than their performances, and needing to have rounder identities, and needing to be able to develop themselves, and celebrate the stuff that they do outside of sport. That could either be something that just enables a completely different focus right now. So that could be, a combat sport athlete doing piano lessons once a week, or it could be something, that is connected to a future career. It almost doesn't matter what it is. What we're trying to do is celebrate it, and make it all right. I think I think what we're seeing through athletes' experience and willingness to share those stories is that it you know it's got such positive impact. And I think our job is to make sure that that an athlete is fully considered before they sort of step into or take on a commitment, and we're not afraid to kind of remind athletes that might be a bit too much, or maybe not right now.
Right. Okay.
Let's look at the bigger picture of of a particular training block or a particular period of competition. So it's our job to try and guide that, and I guess to kind of safeguard performance within that.
Sure.
It's not about just woohoo, like you've got a personal development award, let's go and spend it, you can do whatever you want. We're almost the custodians of that, of the constraints as well. We
Okay.
have to have a reality conversation with the athletes, like you can't go and trek around an Inca trail for 6 months, but let's look at what the options are for what you can do, and when that might happen in your yearly plan.
So dialing it back a little bit so that there is a responsibility to the kind of core objective. Yeah.
Yeah,
No, maybe here's a leaflet for the Yorkshire Dales rather than the Inca Trail. That's something that
exactly,
just
exactly.
pulls it back a bit. Yeah, okay. So we're recording this now before the Olympics. What but the episode will go out after. What are the challenges in the lead up to the games that you're supporting, and then maybe the sort of follow up question I'll
Yeah.
ask about after.
I, I would say that there is so much to get excited about in the lead into the games, but I think as PL practitioners, in particular, we have an eye on the non-selected,
Okay,
and as a group that as a group of athletes that have potentially a high need for support, and what has helped with practitioners being very integrated into the sport is that is A, the relationship is already in place, and B, your support is in the best scenarios like built into that process. So it's not that sort of PL practitioners should find out and it come as a shock. Actually, we're involved in those conversations, and we're involved in that process to the right amount. But yeah, I would say the support of deselected athletes in and essentially that's right now, that's happening right now as teams and different sports are getting announced. PL practitioners are supporting the flip side of that, of athletes. If you think of a sport like hockey, where a huge squad gets almost kind of taken down to half, and taken down again. So the work of the practitioners in preparation for that, and and as decisions are made and communicated, is hugely important to show the care and support that is 100% there for athletes, and some of those selection decisions are so complicated and so tricky, and I would hate to have to be the person who makes those decisions. In fact, that is not a job for me. I don't think I'd ever be able to do that. Yeah, but 100%. One of the exercises we would do with our practitioners at the start of a games year is map out those key significant markers for their sport in terms of qualification, selection, deselection, announcement when the team leaves, and then your PL work almost kind of maps to those kind of key markers. And in terms of post games, one of the excellent projects that we did post Tokyo alongside the mental health team and the sports psychology team is performance decompression. And that is just such a fantastic, brilliant collaborative space for our practitioners to work alongside the psychologists in the sport, to be able to kind of offer that debrief and reflection space for athletes and for staff, and in many ways, part of that conversation is the conversation that PL would take to an athlete anyway, in terms of like debrief. Let's talk about how was your experience, and where are your thoughts right now, and what are you thinking going forward. In many ways, PL practitioners can know an athlete's plans before the sport does, because they need a space to be able to kind of figure out what their options are, and to try and work through that before they kind of put cards on the table, and have that sort of conversation with the sports. So yeah, I think performance decompression, and then of course there is a significant program review post games around October, which means a significant transition load for us to be able to support and manage, and both in terms of athletes leaving the program, but new athletes joining as well. So yeah, we're almost on a slightly different peak
yeah, okay.
to everyone else. I think our peak in terms of like our busy time and where we need to be at our best is post games. Whereas a lot of other practitioners almost like, they're peaking and sort of sending the team off. So yeah,
Yeah.
we're on a slightly shifted cycle, I think.
Does that get any easier? as a practitioner to support the non-selected? Obviously, there's a skill set and key questions
Mm,
that you'd ask. That's emotional, isn't it? And creating new identity beyond your
mm,
sporting prowess, your sporting identity. There's a friction there, isn't there? Does that,
mm,
how do you, as practitioners, best support that process? I'm curious to the inner workings of that.
mm. I, I think a huge amount of it comes down to how it's done in the sport. So if it feels like if it feels like it's done with and not to as much as possible, that tends to um, enable a better level of or almost a speed in which an athlete can understand and accept in order to then be able to receive support and do some work with us if
What
that's
does that mean, Joe? Is that like a transparency of the process?
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Okay.
and often, in the best scenarios, it's almost a sport saying to the athletes, how do you want this to work?
Right. Okay. An
And
agreed.
involving
Okay.
athletes in that process, because we know, and we've experienced it time and again, when athletes, are either deselected or leave a program and have had a really poor experience of that, it's then really difficult for us to initiate support because there's so much emotion and there's so much anger, quite frankly, that it's difficult for us to be able to kind of get, really get into that space and work constructively with the athletes. In the best case scenarios, which is what we're always trying to work for and influence, is we're working on this sort of future plans, future preparations, like what ifing with the athletes, and the process is really good. Like if a sport can get to the end of selection without appeals, for example, because the process has been so, like put together so well, that enables us to be able to kind of step in quicker and be more effective with the support.
Mm. It feels it feels like it's a very simple perspective change to ask, how do you want this? Um, asking an athlete, how would you like me to challenge you when I
Mm,
think you need to push a bit harder, or challenge you to back off? Those would be probably two key conversations I have.
yeah.
Whereas before, I'd rack my brains to sort of what's the body language thing I need to
Correct. Yeah.
compute, or the personality map that I need to connect, or the timing of this. And it's almost like the fourth wall at a theatre, someone sort of looking out to the audience and talking of it's just a secret thing to say, how would you like that to go? And then when it's necessary, you remember that conversation. And that feels like it's ultimately the crux of a lot of this
Mm,
new way of working, of athletes pushing back and saying, I don't like this. Um,
mm,
and coaches going, I'm not sure. I used to be black and white, just do this and bow down to the coach. Where now it's much more consensual, it's much more agreed,
mm,
and that feels as though that's the way forward for how you create outstanding, elite, exceptional performance, but with ownership to a certain extent.
mm. Yeah, totally. Because when you insist, I resist.
Oh, nice.
That's the natural
Yeah.
that's the natural sort of human interaction, and you learn that. We've learned that through our coaching training. If I'm telling, all of a sudden all your energy goes into, what the hell do you know? You don't know about me. You don't
Right.
know. And so I think that, yeah, like that whole "you insist, I resist"
That's a
piece is
catchphrase.
is 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 very much sort of at the forefront of my mind. And you know and there's got to be a balance, hasn't there? Like and I feel for PDs and coaches in
Mm.
these scenarios, because their job isn't easy, and and I don't think anybody intentionally is intentionally doing a bad job, or is trying to give somebody a poor experience. I genuinely don't believe that. But I think there I think there is a development gap in this space, and in terms of, well, what is the alternative and how do I do that alternative really well? And so it might not be possible to involve athletes in the full design of the program, but at least ask them at the end how they would like to be communicated with.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Okay.
how do you want this decision to make its way to you? And accept that it might be different for different individuals, but if you're going to do this process with care, and if you're going to lead with care and show that they matter, you might consider that as as a way of offering some choice in a really difficult situation for an athlete.
And so that's a simple method that people can learn. As you say, there's probably a development gap there, but also a philosophical approach that of thinking, well, short-term results, push, drive, more, hunger, standards, versus actually engaging people in the process. And probably it sounds as though that's going to require a more vulnerable leader, people who might not necessarily have that facade of I know it all and I'm going to make the big decisions and I'm going to stand up and lead, but actually talk to people, and engage the custodians that they're supporting.
Absolutely. Or just engage the people around you that are skilled at that.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think there's far better understanding now across the system of the kind of people that PL practitioners are, and the skill, and the subtlety that they can offer to situations and conversations, and in some of the best examples, it's where a PD or a coach has kind of clicked onto that, and is really kind of using the PL as a sounding board as well, to kind of go like, I'm thinking this, or I want to be able to do this. Like, what am I missing? What have I not thought about? What is important for me to consider? And to engage, a PL, or a psych in that kind of conversation.
Mm. How ubiquitous is this service across sport, the world these days? It does strike me, certainly when I travel and I go and see systems and other institutes or sporting systems. I look around, I think, where's the player support? Where's the athlete support? And I don't know whether I'm just missing that element. I just don't see it, or they're not in that day. What's your sense of where Britain are in relation to other sports within the UK, or the British high performance system within the UK, but also compared to globally?
Mm. So we have a really good relationship with, particularly the professional players associations within the UK, and they are our kind of, our industry peers,
Yeah.
and there is, there is a network and there is a community, and we communicate well, and we meet on a quarterly basis to kind of share what we're doing, share challenges, and it's under the umbrella of the Professional Players Federation. But we're there and representing Olympic and Paralympic sport. TAS is there from a kind of performance pathway perspective. But there's an array around the table, from everything from the Jockeys Association to football, rugby, cricket. So there's particularly in the UK, I think there's really good connection with that, and I think we're seeing, particularly in football, particularly in the women's game, and at academy level, a significant growth in these types of roles, and they're not necessarily called performance lifestyle. And I've had a few conversations with different people at the FA, and I understand why why that name might not fit in football, and they might, and they may prefer something more like player care or player support, or particularly focusing on the well-being piece. So it feels like a really kind of healthy and growing industry within the UK for sure. And from a professional sports perspective internationally, I think that's particularly healthy as well through the World Players Association. There's an annual conference. It staggers me as to how many people go to that, and the range of different professional sporting bodies that are represented there, particularly from the States. And I'm aware of, the Netherlands have a really active program, Belgium, Germany, France, and of course, the Aussies and the Kiwis have always been leaders in this space, and have always done a huge amount of work and taken it really seriously. So from where I sit and where I'm connected to, it feels healthy. It feels that it's still got headroom. It's growing. It's still organizing itself in some places. I think in some areas it's perhaps more definitive than in others. I think speaking to counterparts in Australia and New Zealand, it still feels like some have still experienced this feeling of needing to sell
Right.
what I do, and needing to kind of position this properly, and still, they're still turning the tanker just like we are, I think. But yeah, it feels, it feels in a pretty healthy space, and I think there's a decent level of connection internationally as well.
Because I remember I can't remember what the term when it was now, but the term was that the performance lifestyle was like the gherkin in the Big Mac. That was the sort of phrase. It's just sort of, you can take it out if you want, which I guess was where it's at. But it does feel as though over the last maybe 5 years or so, the momentum. Oh, I got so excited then I couldn't even say momentum. The momentum behind looking after people,
Mm.
the pushback, the reviews and findings of abuse in sport are significant accelerators of, we need to look after these people.
Mhm.
And it feels as though you have been a pioneer in this area, leading the way. I'm curious to know what your thoughts are for the future about. I'm sure you're still in the mix of, we've got to resolve a few fundamentals and so on. But if you were to cast your mind, I'd hesitate to say another 20 years in the institute system. But if you were to sort of look forward and think, okay, I'd love it if we sorted this out. What would you be pushing for?
I think yeah, I'm definitely not planning on another 20 years.
You might have said that 20 years ago when you were 2 years in.
um, well, what I'd love to see is one conversation for an athlete that, so that the performance planning process has this stuff within it, and it is planned, discussed, viewed as part of performance, just as part of being a funded athlete, as part of being on this program. The holistic development of athletes is part of performance. I think it's still, and there are some really good examples of sports having a good go at this, and practitioners really sort of pushing to integrate this conversation and to integrate into the process. And there really are, but there are still some sports where this is a separate conversation, and it sits separately and an athlete's got to work twice as hard to put all these pieces together for themselves. So, I would love to see, every sport, every athlete review meeting, like touching on this as well, and ensuring that, that the athletes are encouraged because ultimately, as an athlete, if your coach thinks it's important, you're more likely to think it's important. And so, I would love to see this, much more integrated. Like I say, there are some pockets of really good practice now that we can actually point towards and go, they do it really well, but it's not sort of widespread, and it's not as normal as it should be, I don't think.
And what do you think that requires? Do you think that comes down to future coach education that creates the case for it?
Yeah, yeah. I think there's a bit of that, and I also feel like coaches have been neglected a little
I'd agree.
over the years, and I wonder if because they've perhaps not received a huge amount of support and development for themselves, it's difficult for them to see the value of that for somebody else, or or for the athlete. So it's, or perhaps it's difficult for them to see that as as a really important part of this process and this experience. So I think, yeah, I think coach education and the development and support of coaches is something pretty critical, for sure.
Love that. I love the fact that you've distilled that down to one conversation where a coach is able to, coach performance director is able to check in systematically or review or conversationally to be able to check in with how everything's going outside of the sporting environment, even if the motivation is to facilitate and support enhanced performance. It's got to be the way forward, hasn't it, Joe?
I think so.
Joe, thanks so much. I've always just loved the passion, the guile, and the campaign for better that you've created over the years, and truly pioneered this space. And I can't wait to see how it all progresses over the next 22 years or so, whether it's involving you or not.
Thanks so much, Steve. Really enjoyed speaking with you.